I thought I had it all figured out. After 3 years of dating Melissa, I was finally about to marry the woman I believed was my soulmate. We had our future mapped out together down to the names of our future children. Then came that dinner party, the one where she slapped me so hard across the face that my cheek stung for hours. In that moment, everything I thought I knew about our relationship shattered like glass. Looking back, maybe I should have seen the signs earlier. Before I dive into how my perfect relationship crumbled, I would love to know where you are watching this from. Drop your location in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe to hear more stories about the difficult choices we sometimes have to make for our own well-being. I first met Melissa at my college friend Tim's summer barbecue 4 years ago. I remember the exact moment she walked into the backyard. The sun caught her auburn hair, making it look like it was on fire. But what really drew me in was her laugh. It filled the entire space, genuine and uninhibited. I found myself gravitating toward her throughout the evening, and by the time the party ended, I had her number. Our first date was at a small Italian restaurant downtown. She wore a green dress that matched her eyes, and we talked for hours about everything from our favorite hiking trails to our shared love of 70s cinema. There was something magnetic about her passion for life. When she spoke about her job as a graphic designer, her eyes lit up with enthusiasm. I found myself wanting to be around that energy constantly. We fell into a rhythm quickly. Weekend hikes became our tradition, followed by movie nights, where we would analyze every scene of classics like The Godfather and Annie Hall. She introduced me to rock climbing, and I taught her how to make my grandmother's famous lasagna. It felt like we complemented each other perfectly. My friends would comment on how I seemed happier than they had ever seen me. As our relationship progressed, it made sense to move in together after our 1-year anniversary. We found a cozy apartment with a small balcony where we would have coffee every morning before work. I loved how she added small touches to make it feel like home-hanging art prints she had created, and filling bookshelves with novels we both enjoyed. Our personalities seemed to balance each other out perfectly. I'd always been the calm, rational type who thought things through carefully before making decisions. Melissa brought spontaneity and passion into my life. Where I would plan a vacation months in advance, she might suggest a weekend road trip on Thursday night. I believed her fiery personality was the perfect complement to my steady nature. We started talking about our future together more seriously. We created a savings plan to buy a house within 2 years. We discussed our career goals openly. She wanted to eventually start her own design studio, and I was working toward a management position in software development. We even agreed on wanting 2 children and a dog when the time was right. After 2 years together, I knew she was the one I wanted to spend my life with. I planned a proposal that combined our love of hiking with a touch of romance. We trekked up to Eagle Summit, her favorite spot with panoramic views of the valley. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the landscape, I got down on one knee and asked her to marry me. The ring was a sapphire surrounded by small diamonds, unconventional just like her. Her eyes filled with tears as she shouted, "Yes," throwing her arms around me with such force she nearly knocked me over. On the drive back down the mountain, she was already listing wedding venues and color schemes. By the time we reached home, she had texted all her friends and family with a photo of the ring. Our families were thrilled. My parents hosted an engagement dinner where they presented Melissa with my grandmother's recipe book as a welcome to the family. Her parents flew in from Arizona and brought champagne to toast our future together. Everyone commented on what a perfect match we were, how our children would be beautiful and talented. Looking back now, I can see there were warning signs I chose to ignore. The first real argument happened during a dinner with my college friends. Jackson made a joke about my dancing abilities, and Melissa took extreme offense on my behalf, even though I was laughing along. She became cold and distant for the remainder of the evening, and later told me my friends were disrespectful and I should stand up for myself more. There were other incidents that gave me pause. When I missed a dinner reservation because a work meeting ran late, she gave me the silent treatment for 2 days. When her sister got engaged 6 months after us and chose a similar wedding venue, Melissa refused to speak to her for weeks. I justified these reactions as passion, telling myself and others that she just felt things more deeply than most people. Sometimes when she was angry, She would make cutting remarks about my career ambitions not being aggressive enough or my fashion sense being too conservative. These comments would sting, but she would always apologize after cooling down, telling me she loved me exactly as I was and was just stressed or tired. I believed her because I wanted to. As our wedding date approached, the tension between us seemed to increase rather than decrease. What should have been an exciting time of planning our future together became filled with arguments and tears. The wedding planning brought out a side of Melissa I had glimpsed before, but never so consistently. The stress of wedding planning magnified issues that had been simmering beneath the surface. Melissa became fixated on creating the perfect event, often at the expense of our relationship. What started as enthusiastic planning sessions turned into heated debates about everything from napkin colors to seating arrangements. Every decision became a potential battlefield. Costs spiraled as Melissa insisted on luxury options for everything. When I suggested we stick to our budget, she accused me of not caring about our special day. Each conversation about money ended with her in tears and me feeling guilty for being practical. I started avoiding these discussions altogether, watching with growing unease as our savings dwindled. Her criticism of my family intensified during this period. She complained that my mother was too involved in the planning, yet simultaneously accused her of not showing enough enthusiasm. She found fault with my sister's choice of bridesmaid dress, claiming it was an attempt to upstage her. My father was too quiet at family gatherings, which she interpreted as disapproval. My friends became another source of contention. She questioned why my best friend Jake needed to give a speech, suggesting he would embarrass me with college stories. She vetoed 2 of my groomsmen selections, claiming she never felt comfortable around them. I found myself defending the people I loved most while trying to keep peace with the woman I was about to marry. Through all of this, I maintained my commitment. I told myself this was temporary stress that would disappear after the wedding. I believed once the pressure of planning was behind us, the Melissa I fell in love with would fully return. I repeated this like a mantra whenever doubt crept in. 2 weeks before the wedding, both our families gathered for a celebration dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown. The evening was meant to be a joyful coming together of our 2 families before the big day. Melissa looked stunning in a blue dress, her hair styled elegantly. As we entered the private dining room, I felt a surge of pride and happiness, despite the recent tension. The trouble began when my mother innocently mentioned the contingency plan in case of rain on our outdoor ceremony. Melissa stiffened beside me, her smile becoming fixed. I could feel the change in her energy immediately. She politely but coldly informed my mother that negative thinking would bring bad luck, effectively shutting down the conversation. As the evening progressed, I noticed Melissa's responses becoming shorter, her laughter more forced. When the topic of our honeymoon came up, her sister innocently asked if we were still going to Bali or if we had changed to the Maldives, as Melissa had mentioned considering. This seemingly harmless question triggered something in Melissa. She shot her sister a look that could freeze water and stated that if people would stop interfering with her plans, maybe they would stop changing. An uncomfortable silence fell over the table. I placed my hand on hers under the table, hoping to calm her, but she pulled away sharply. During the main course, the conversation turned to wedding venue details. My father mentioned that the historic garden where we planned to hold the ceremony had recently renovated their gazebo, which might affect our photography plans. This information was meant to be helpful, a heads up so we could adjust if needed. Melissa put down her fork with deliberate slowness. Her voice was quiet but intense as she asked why everyone was determined to find problems with her perfectly planned wedding. The tension at the table was palpable. My mother tried to smooth things over by changing the subject to the excellent food, but the damage was done. I suggested we step outside for some fresh air, hoping to diffuse the situation privately. Once in the restaurant lobby, I gently asked what was wrong. The floodgates opened. She accused me of allowing my family to undermine her, of not supporting her vision, of making her look foolish in front of everyone. Her voice grew increasingly loud, despite the public setting. I kept my voice calm, trying to reason with her, explaining that everyone was just trying to help, and there was no ill intent. This only seemed to fuel her anger. She accused me of always taking my family's side, of never truly being on her team. Her face flushed with anger, her hands gesticulating wildly, as her volume continued to rise. Hotel staff and other guests began to glance our way. Embarrassed, I suggested we continue the conversation later at home. I placed my hand lightly on her arm to guide her back to the private room. That was when it happened. The slap came out of nowhere. Her hand connected with my cheek with such force that my head jerked to the side. The sound echoed in the lobby, sharp and final. In that instant, time seemed to stop. My face burned with pain and shock. My ears rang. But worse than the physical pain was the realization that the woman I loved, the woman I was about to promise my life to, had just hit me in anger. As my head cleared, I became aware of the complete silence around us. The restaurant staff had frozen in place. A couple seated nearby stared with wide eyes. And worst of all, I realized our families had witnessed everything from the entrance to the private dining room, where they must have come looking for us. The look on my mother's face is something I will never forget. Shock mingled with a fierce protective anger I had rarely seen. My father stood rigid, his expression hardening into something unreadable. Melissa's own parents looked mortified, her mother's hand covering her mouth, her father staring at the floor. What hurt almost as much as the slap was what came after. There was no immediate apology, no horrified recognition of a line crossed. Instead, Melissa said, "Now look what you made me do," her voice accusatory rather than remorseful. As if I had been responsible for her loss of control. As if I deserved what had happened. In that moment, something broke inside me. A clarity I had been avoiding for months finally crystallized. This was not an isolated incident. This was not just wedding stress. This was a glimpse of what my future might hold, and it terrified me. Without a word, I turned and walked out of the restaurant. I heard her calling my name, heard the confused murmurs of our families, but I could not bring myself to turn around. I got into my car and drove my cheek, still stinging my mind, racing through every red flag I had ignored, every excuse I had made, every boundary that had been slowly eroded. As I drove through the city streets with no particular destination, memories flooded back. The time she threw a glass against the wall during an argument about holiday plans, the way she would give me the silent treatment for days over minor disagreements, how she would criticize my friends until I saw them less and less, the subtle ways she would undermine my confidence, then build me back up with affection and praise. The pattern was clear now, illuminated by the physical line she had crossed. What had happened tonight was not an aberration. It was an escalation of existing behavior. And if I went through with the wedding, I would be telling her and myself that this behavior was acceptable, that I deserved it somehow. I ended up at Jake's apartment, my oldest friend, who had expressed concerns about Melissa that I had defensively dismissed. When he opened the door, one look at my face told him everything he needed to know. He wordlessly handed me a beer and made up his couch without asking questions. That night, as I stared at the ceiling unable to sleep, I made my decision. I stayed at Jake's place for 3 days, not answering the dozens of calls and texts from Melissa. I needed space to think clearly, away from her influence and explanations. Jake gave me the guest room and the distance I needed, only occasionally checking if I wanted to talk. When I finally did open up to him, his response was measured, but firm. "Danny," he said as we sat on his balcony watching the sunset, "if a friend told you his girlfriend hit him in public, what advice would you give?" The question hung in the air, and I knew the answer immediately. I would tell them to leave, that physical violence is never acceptable regardless of gender, that love should never hurt or humiliate. I spoke with my parents the next day. My mother, usually reserved with her opinions about my relationships, was uncharacteristically direct. "You deserve someone who treats you with respect at all times, especially when angry." My father, a man of few words, simply said, "Son, this is not something you can or should try to fix." These conversations strengthened my resolve, but I still felt torn. 3 years of my life, countless happy memories and dreams for the future weighed against the reality of what our relationship had become. I loved Melissa, or at least the person I thought she was. Walking away felt like amputating a part of myself. After careful consideration, I asked Melissa to meet me at a coffee shop near Jake's apartment, a public place but quiet enough for a private conversation. I arrived early, rehearsing what I would say, trying to prepare for her reaction. When she walked in, she looked smaller somehow, her usual confident stride replaced by uncertainty. "Danny," she said, sliding into the chair across from me. "I have been worried sick. Why have you not returned my calls? Everyone is asking about the wedding plans, and I do not know what to tell them." There was no mention of the slap, no acknowledgement of why I might have needed space. I took a deep breath and spoke the words I had practiced. "Melissa, I cannot marry you. What happened at the dinner was not just about a slap. It was about patterns of behavior that are not healthy for either of us." My voice remained steady despite the hurricane of emotions inside me. Her reaction evolved rapidly. First came disbelief, her eyes widening as she realized I was serious. "You cannot be serious. Over one little mistake I was stressed, and you embarrassed me in front of our families." When she saw this was not working, anger flashed across her face. "After all, we have built together. You are throwing everything away over nothing." As I remained firm, explaining that physical violence was my absolute boundary, her tactics shifted again. Tears filled her eyes, her voice breaking, as she promised it would never happen again, that she would get therapy, that she had just been overwhelmed with wedding stress. She reached for my hands across the table, but I gently pulled away. "I care about you," I told her, "which is why I hope you do speak to someone about managing your emotions. But I cannot continue this relationship. My decision is final." The look of desperation in her eyes almost broke my resolve, but I remembered the shock of her hand against my face, the lack of true remorse afterward. The logistics of ending an engagement 2 weeks before the wedding were painfully complicated. I dreaded making the calls to relatives who had already booked flights, returning gifts, canceling vendors. But my family rallied around me, handling many of these tasks, so I could focus on moving forward. The financial losses were significant, but I considered it a small price for my future well-being. Returning to our apartment to collect my things was one of the hardest parts. We had built a life there, and every corner held memories. Melissa was staying with her sister, allowing me to pack without confrontation. Jake and my brother helped me move everything in a single day, efficiently sorting through 3 years of accumulated belongings. Finding a new apartment was the next challenge. The rental market was tight, and my budget limited now that I was solely responsible for housing costs. I eventually found a small one-bedroom in a different neighborhood, nothing fancy but clean and quiet. The bare walls and empty spaces felt both lonely and liberating. Melissa's attempts to change my mind began almost immediately and grew increasingly desperate. Daily text messages ranged from loving memories to angry accusations to pitiful pleas. "Remember our first anniversary at the lake? You are making the biggest mistake of your life. I cannot eat or sleep without you." Each one was more difficult to ignore than the last. The phone calls came at all hours. Sometimes I would answer, trying to be kind, but firm. Other times, when it was late and my resolve was weakened by exhaustion, I would let them go to voicemail. Listening to her tearful messages the next day was like reopening a wound that was trying to heal. She began showing up at my workplace, waiting in the lobby with coffee or small gifts. My coworkers were understanding but concerned. After the third occurrence, my supervisor gently suggested I might need to consider more formal boundaries. The company's security team began escorting her out when she appeared. Mutual friends became unwitting messengers. "Melissa asked me to tell you she started therapy," or "She really seems to be working on herself, Danny." Some friends understood my position immediately, while others suggested I was being too harsh, that everyone deserves a second chance. These conversations forced me to articulate my boundaries, repeatedly strengthening my conviction each time. Her family was perhaps the most difficult to handle. Her mother called me in tears, asking what they could do to help fix things. Her father, a man I had greatly respected, left a voicemail saying he understood my concerns but believed people could change with the right motivation. Her younger sister sent long emails detailing Melissa's depression and asking if I could at least meet with her one more time. The pressure to reconcile came from unexpected sources, too. My aunt, who had experienced her own troubled relationship in her youth, suggested that marriage was about working through difficult times. A colleague argued that couples therapy could address these issues if we were both committed. Even my barber offered unsolicited advice about forgiveness and second chances. Through all of this, I maintained my boundary. Each conversation, each plea, each argument forced me to examine my decision from every angle. And each time I came back to the same conclusion: I deserved a relationship built on mutual respect, where physical violence was never an option, regardless of the circumstances. The weeks following my decision were some of the most challenging of my life. I alternated between certainty and doubt, between grief for the relationship I had lost and relief at escaping a potentially dangerous situation. Sleep was elusive, and focusing at work nearly impossible. Initially, I isolated myself, avoiding social gatherings where I might face questions or judgment. My apartment became both sanctuary and prison. Weekends stretched endlessly without the routines and plans that had structured my life with Melissa. I found myself staring at walls, replaying our relationship in my mind, searching for signs I had missed or ways I might have contributed to its toxic dynamics. 3 weeks after the breakup, Jake convinced me to see a therapist. "You would not try to set your own broken leg," he reasoned. "So why try to heal emotional trauma alone, doctor?" Reynolds, a compassionate but straightforward counselor, helped me recognize the subtle patterns of emotional manipulation that had characterized my relationship with Melissa. "What you experienced has elements of emotional abuse," she explained during one session. "The isolation from friends and family, the criticism followed by affection, the blame shifting, and ultimately the physical aggression. These are not signs of passion or love, but of control." Her validation of my experience was powerful, helping me trust my own perceptions again. Through therapy, I began to understand how I had enabled some of these dynamics. My conflict avoidance, desire to please, and tendency to make excuses for unacceptable behavior had allowed boundaries to be crossed repeatedly. This realization was painful, but necessary for growth. Gradually, I reconnected with friends I had drifted away from during my relationship. A college buddy invited me to join his basketball league. My cousin convinced me to attend a cooking class I would have previously dismissed as not my thing. Each new experience helped rebuild my sense of identity, separate from being Melissa's fiancée. Work became an unexpected source of healing. I threw myself into a challenging new project, grateful for the mental engagement that kept rumination at bay. My team's support was subtle but meaningful, from saved coffee when I arrived late after therapy appointments to genuine interest in my gradually improving well-being. About 2 months after the breakup, I began renovating my small apartment. The physical labor of painting walls and building bookshelves was therapeutic, giving me tangible evidence of progress. Each change made the space more mine, less a temporary shelter, and more a home reflecting my tastes and preferences. Throughout this period, Melissa's attempts to reconcile continued but gradually changed in nature. The angry messages decreased, replaced by more reflective communications. "I have been working with my therapist on my anger issues," one text read. "I understand now that what I did was absolutely wrong and why you had to leave." While these messages showed growth on her part, they did not change my decision. I responded with kindness, but firmness, wishing her well in her healing journey, while maintaining my boundary against rekindling our relationship. Sometimes this felt cruel, especially when her messages expressed genuine remorse, but I reminded myself that maintaining this boundary was necessary for both our well-being. 3 months after the breakup, Melissa asked to meet in person. After discussing it with Dr. Reynolds, I agreed to a brief coffee at the same cafe where I had ended our engagement. I approached the meeting with trepidation, unsure of her intentions or my own emotional resilience. She looked different somehow, both more fragile and stronger than before. The conversation started awkwardly, neither of us quite knowing how to interact in our new reality. Gradually, we found a rhythm of respectful but distant exchange. "I want you to know that I am truly sorry," she said midway through our meeting. "Not just for slapping you, but for all the ways I tried to control and manipulate you. My therapist has helped me see patterns from my childhood that I was repeating, but that is no excuse." I acknowledged her apology with sincerity. "I appreciate that, and I genuinely hope your therapy continues to help. Everyone deserves to have healthy relationships, including you." The words felt both true and final. When she tentatively asked if there was any chance of reconciliation, I was able to respond with clarity and compassion. "Melissa, some boundaries once crossed cannot be uncrossed. I believe people can change, and it sounds like you are doing that important work. But this relationship became unhealthy for both of us, and resuming it would risk falling back into those patterns." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded in understanding. "I thought you might say that. Part of my therapy is learning to accept the consequences of my actions, even when they are painful." As we parted, there was a sense of closure that had been missing before a mutual recognition that this chapter of our lives was definitively ending. In the months that followed, my healing continued steadily, if not always smoothly. There were still nights when I questioned my decision, still moments when a song or scent would trigger memories of happier times. But these instances became less frequent, less overwhelming. 6 months after what would have been our wedding day, I ran into Melissa's sister at a local farmer's market. Our conversation was surprisingly comfortable, focusing on neutral topics like her new job and my recent promotion. As we were about to part ways, she mentioned that Melissa had moved to Chicago for a fresh start and was continuing her therapy there. "She is doing better," her sister told me. "The work she has done on herself these past months, it was necessary regardless of whether you two reconciled. In a strange way, I think she is grateful for the wake-up call, even though losing you has been incredibly painful for her." This information brought a sense of peace I had not expected. The knowledge that something positive had come from our painful ending, that Melissa was finding her own path to healing, allowed me to release lingering guilt about standing firm in my decision. My own life continued to evolve in positive ways. The promotion at work brought new challenges and satisfaction. The friendships I had rekindled deepened, providing a support network more diverse and balanced than the isolated relationship I had shared with Melissa. I even began dating again cautiously, and with a much clearer understanding of healthy relationship dynamics. Looking back now, I recognize that walking away from that relationship was one of the most difficult and important decisions of my life. It would have been easier in many ways to accept the apologies, to believe the promises of change, to carry forward with the wedding plans and the future we had envisioned together. But I have learned that real love does not hurt. It does not diminish or control or strike out in anger. Real love respects boundaries, encourages growth, and makes you feel safe in both body and spirit. These are non-negotiable requirements, not luxuries or idealistic fantasies. The greatest lesson from this experience has been learning to trust myself, to recognize that my feelings and boundaries are valid. The quiet voice inside that had been whispering concerns about Melissa's behavior long before the slap deserved to be heard much sooner. I will never again dismiss that inner wisdom in favor of external appearances or commitments. If you find yourself in a relationship where abuse of any kind has occurred, please know that walking away is not giving up or being unforgiving. It is an act of self-preservation and ultimately of self-love. No one deserves to live in fear of the person who is supposed to love them most. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to start again. Today, I am grateful for the peace I have found, for the growth this painful experience triggered, and for the clearer vision I now have of what a truly loving partnership should be. Sometimes the end of one path is necessary to find a better one, even when that ending feels like the last thing you want or need. Have you ever had to make a difficult decision to prioritize your well-being over someone else's desires? I would love to hear your stories and insights in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that it is okay to walk away from situations that harm you, no matter how much history or love is involved. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I wish you relationships built on genuine respect and love.